Welcome to the Rethink Vertical podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by the UAS Cluster Initiative. So today I sit down with Ryan Walsh, founder and CEO of Valqari. Ryan's been pioneering the drone delivery industry, leading Valqari to be a major player in the global market. He's been working on fully autonomous drone delivery technology for the past 10 years, becoming a major voice in the industry and regularly speaking at conferences around the world. He is the lead inventor on 29 granted drone delivery patents, and he has more than 31 pending patent applications to date. Before founding Valqari, Ryan started his career in special operations as an Army Ranger with the 75th Ranger Regiment, having served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. As a trusted voice in the drone industry, he serves as the North American Chapter Director for the Drone Logistics Ecosystem. Ryan also recently served as the external expert on the Canadac Advisory Board, assisting Canadian regulators such as Transport Canada and NAV Canada in determining the next round of drone regulations in that country. Ryan has founded and run several companies with a multi-million-dollar annual revenues from inception to exit, and many of those in the Chicagoland area. He is a strategic advisor to several technology companies, including Soteria Battery Innovation Group and Havenshine. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics from NEIU and his MBA from North Central College, using his GI Bill to attend night school after leaving the military. He also volunteers his time with Three Rangers Foundation, Special Operations Transition Foundation, and American Corporate Partners mentoring transitioning special ops veterans as they move into their civilian lives. Ryan has led Valqari to be selected as the best tech startup in North America by the Timmy Awards in 2020, a Chicago Innovation Award winner in 2022, an 1871 Momentum Award winner in 2022 as well, and finally a Chicago InnoStars winner in 2019. One of the great things about talking with Ryan is that you get the real unvarnished truth about running a hardware-focused startup in the aerospace industry, and that means the good and the bad. So this conversation will be super valuable for those early in the startup cycle looking for a glimpse into the future. Hope you enjoy the episode. Well, Ryan, welcome to the Rethink Vertical podcast. It's great to have you on the episode today.
Thank you so much for having me, Craig.
Yeah, so I've been following what you guys are doing at Valqari for a while. Been interested to see sort of the kind of the build up and all the traction you guys are starting to get. I think for the listeners, it'd be helpful though, maybe if you kind of just share a little bit about your background and maybe how Valqari came about.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So I started my career in special operations at the 75th Ranger Regiment. Actually, this one right above me. And it was right when we had started the invasion of Iraq and drones were really entering the battlefield for the first time. So I really was seeing the evolution, seeing the transition that they were going through and how they were starting to have impacts on the battlefield. But, just kind of kept it in the back of my head. And fast forward many years later, and co-inventor and I started seeing the opportunity for them in the logistics space in 2013. And so we started working on that, filing patents, and have been working on it ever since. So I've been in the space for a decade now. A little bit about what Valqari does, though. We build the landing stations and the infrastructure for particularly drone delivery, but we are starting to branch into a few other areas, security and inspection and things like that. So our goal has always been to build universal systems so it can work with any drone airframe and any operator. That's something we feel is a very critical requirement of infrastructure for drones, just like for cars. You don't have a different lane for trucks and motorcycles and cars, and it all works on one standard. And so that was our goal, to build that into our systems.
Right. Yeah, I think that comment about standards is a really interesting one. We're seeing that kind of on the charging side, and like folks starting to talk about, what does this look like? How does everyone sort of participate in this standard of the way receptacles are built for folks to plug in and charge? And so from this concept of the original concept of this drone mailbox, obviously it's much more than that. What was the thought process that you guys went through to say, okay, there really needs to be a single platform that everybody could use, and then maybe talk a little bit about how that fits into where you're seeing the drone delivery market sort of expand. Like we see videos of like Google Wing and these folks like using drone delivery and how they're dropping packages. how does your platform, how do you see it kind of fitting into that ecosystem?
It's a great question. So, this probably comes from my unique perspective on things, having both a special operations military background, but also, education and economics and an MBA, and getting to see it from both a
Mm.
strategic and tactical point of view, but also from a commercial point of view. And so going through that initial exercise back in 2013, we realized drones are happening. Right. There has never been a situation in history where you have an economically viable logistics technology that doesn't get adopted. As long as it makes sense from a monetary point of view, it tends to be the way things go, almost exclusively 100% of the time. The only time you see things come in and disappear is when they just don't make sense from that commercial perspective. And so we went through, and drones obviously made sense. And seeing the evolution that they had just in the years I was in the military, there was no question that they were going to follow a typical commercial cycle and be about 20 years behind the military's adoption.
Mm.
That was kind of the timeline we started banking on. But we realized very quickly that we weren't going to be able to get something market controlling on the drones, right? So we did our research, and it turns out the first drone patent was filed by Nikola Tesla, 1898. Open control boat, actually. And the problem is that when you go through the last 125 years of prior art in the drone space, getting something on the aircraft was going to be very, very difficult. And the last place we wanted to be was, somewhere in 2020 something, trying to squeeze out an extra 5 minutes of flight time or an extra
Mm.
2 miles an hour or whatever against, some major corporation that we couldn't go toe to toe with.
Right.
It seemed like that was a recipe for disaster. And so we kind of turned the whole model on its head. How do the customers interact with this? How would I, as a lazy, picky, very not willing to be inconvenienced customer, how do I integrate with this in my day-to-day
Mm.
life? And the original videos we were seeing from Amazon, they're landing this giant drone in your yard, and other ones, they're winching it down. And I think the winch is better than landing, but it doesn't really solve any of the problems, right? People still steal it, you still damage it, your food's getting cold on the ground. How do we fix this? And so we focused in on that. We tried to make it as close to what people are used to using, but at the same time, to your point, you're not going to have a UPS mailbox and a USPS mailbox and a FedEx and an Amazon. That would be crazy. So how do you get to a point where you can work with all of these systems that have nothing close to a standard at all yet? So we spent a lot of time in our centering mechanism, and a lot of the
Mm.
features in our system were particularly designed around that agnosticism and being universal.
Yeah, I saw a video. First time I'd seen the video of, I think you were in a parking lot, you were showing like what it looked like when it went between two stations. And what caught my eye was that centering technology. Because I'm thinking like, that's got to be pretty adaptive to fit multiple different types. I mean, because the reality is you've got to get it centered if it's going to, deliver the package properly. So yeah, I can imagine that's not probably when you're going into it, you're probably not thinking like the centering part is going to be one of the most challenging parts. But then you get into, you're like, oh man, we've got to figure out to do this right, and it's got to work every time for all different types of drones.
Yeah,
It's really interesting.
started with the single family home mailbox. If you look back to some of our 2017, 2018 videos, and no centering, no anything, and we had drones falling off the side and testing all the time.
Mm.
We were expecting too much out of the drone and not enough real world reality
Mm.
playing into it. And that's kind of what pushed us more and more to, let's put all of that functionality on the box, take the accuracy away from the drone, take all of those requirements off the drone. If it can hit a 5x5 square, can we get it over the elevator, right? And so
Yeah.
thousands of flights to trial and error, but we got there.
Yeah. So it'd probably be helpful for folks. Can you walk us through like the technology, especially the mailbox technology, the different types of applications that you're looking at, and like who do you envision your biggest customers being for the product?
Sure. And I guess just to kind of context that, right, we started with the landing stations and it has evolved from, single family to the large six lockers and now send and receive and all of that.
Mm.
But through that evolution, we've opened up a lot of new capabilities and a lot of new use cases. We've seen a lot of growth in healthcare and hospitality. We've seen a growing amount in maritime and military. I think e-commerce and some of those more convenient type deliveries are going to be some of the last adopting,
Mm.
just because of the price points on medical and some of these more urgent priority deliveries. They tend to just be a little bit easier on the initial price points for
Right.
technology. But golf courses, stadiums, campuses, we've seen a surprising amount of interest in those areas. But even stuff we're doing intra-island, the
Mm.
beauty of this technology is it doesn't really matter what you're flying over and it doesn't really matter what you put in the box as long as it fits and it's the right weight. So, we can really opened the door to a lot, and almost every industry is impacted by last mile delivery. Even auto mechanics, you pull in with your 95 Corolla, they're not going to the parts there, so they have to go to a central warehouse, get it, ship it in the next day. There's a lot of couriers involved in that, lawyers getting documents back and forth to the courthouse, so
Mm.
people you don't think that would be impacted by this are significantly benefiting from this type of technology.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. This probably applies to many other business models outside of Valqari. How do you get that message out to future customers that this is a problem that we actually can solve? Once they may not like, you think about folks at the courthouse, like they're not really thinking about this being a thing right now. How do you get that message out to folks?
It's a slow and steady messaging for sure. Consistency, and we've been live as Valqari. We filed our patents in 2013. We formed Valqari in 2017 to operationalize it once we got them granted, the initial ones. And it's been a lot of education more than anything, a lot of outreach and evangelizing like we're doing here, and just letting people know this is what's out there and this is what we can do. And we started with the mailboxes and then eventually started building the software, and now we can provide a full integrated system with the drones through our drone partners. So anybody from a fast food restaurant, quick service restaurant can come to us and say, we're looking at expanding to offsite delivery or offsite pickup. Great. We can provide that solution, right? If a hospital comes to us and we're looking for point-to-point deliveries across the hospital labs, great, we can do that. Or if you're a drone company, you have an existing fleet that you've spent $100,000 on, great, we'll provide the software in the landing stations. You don't have to have the off-the-shelf package, right? We can piece it together like Legos, and that modularity and that extensibility is really what drives that value, in my opinion.
Yeah. What are some of the cool projects you guys are working on right now that you can share with folks?
Sure. I'm really excited about what we're doing in Guam with Bella Wings, partly because Guam's just such a beautiful place.
Right.
Things are incredible. People are just the most wonderful people. It's just an idyllic place to be doing something as cool as flying robots around.
Right. Wish it was a little shorter flight, but right, there you
go. So yeah, I really enjoy that. We're doing a lot of great stuff with Workhorse right now. They've got the Horsefly platform, which has gone through extensive upgrades and renovations over the years from the original version of the Horsefly way back when. And I'll be honest, it's the first time I've really had a drone in hand that's blown me away. It flies almost like a UFO. And I say that with it's just such a smooth motion, and it flies just how you would almost picture drones would in a sci-fi movie, not kind of the erratic stuff that we still see a lot today. And so it's just such a refined platform. It's so user friendly. And so, I'm really excited about the integration work we're doing with them. I think that's going to open the doors to a number of new customers and new use cases we're going to see out there. And with the announcements from the FAA last week, we're very excited about, just what the future holds and being on the crest of this wave right now.
Yeah. All right. So you brought it up then. Let's talk about the FAA a little bit. I don't want to bash on my old employer too much, but from your perspective, I mean, I know you've got a little bit different perspective because you guys are building hardware that's not regulated, really, it's in any way. But all of your customers are live in this world of regulation and Part 107, Part 108, whatever that looks like in the future. And I will say that, to the FAA's credit, they have, I think over the last year or two, it's been very accelerated as far as their motivation has been increased. But a lot of good stuff coming out. I think we still have a ways to go. From the regulatory standpoint, how does that impact what you guys are doing? Or is it just like we're sort of waiting on our future partners to be able to scale, for us to scale right along with them?
More so the second piece.
Yeah.
But we are 100% impacted by the regulation for that reason. It's the single biggest factor that's impacting us and many other in the industry. And what's frustrating is you look at some of these other countries that have successfully implementing, and maybe not the whole picture, but doing certain pieces successfully. And it seems like it's difficult for these regulatory groups to take those lessons learned and put together a cohesive strategy. And, you look at China and they're 4 or 5 years ahead of us. They've got regular deliveries happening all over that country. And it's a shame because I feel like the U.S. in particular really lost an advantage. We had one and we lost it. And, China seeing that capability and the advantage and kind of what these could do in the future of not only warfare, but in general, they're subsidizing DJI and they're providing all these benefits and incentives. And, the other side in the U.S. and most of the Western world, it's the complete opposite. We're fighting over crumbs in a lot of
right.
So it's just not tenable. You can't have better prices on the labor, then subsidize it.
Right.
Willing and open ecosystem for these companies to thrive in, and somehow, some way, we're expecting the Western world to have matching capabilities. It's a crazy proposition when you think about it. So I think that this is much bigger than just airspace regulation. This is a national security concern. We need to look at it more so as such.
That's a good point. And I've heard that more and more kind of be expressed as the narrative. It's like, this move beyond, okay, now these are, okay, they start out as toys, they become recreation, then they become commercial. And now it's like making that switch. I mean, and I think, from some of the folks that we work with that focus more on the DoD application, the war in Ukraine has been eye-opening is not the right word. It's not a strong enough term, especially from the government side, to go, okay, this is a game-changing technology, not just commercially, but on the battlefront. And I think it's, from your perspective, where you came from and these timelines, I'm sure, that's probably helped accelerate it. But I just can't imagine that national security impact is not something that folks have to take really seriously right now.
So I was trying to put this in front of, AFWorks and SoftWorks and all that back in 2018, 2019. They weren't interested. They weren't hearing it. And it's funny because it took Ukraine to actually open people's eyes. And when you go back, right, I mean, they always say amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics, right? And it's the core, right? Napoleon, that's all he cared about was the logistics. Because that was everything. And so when you have a 15-year-old in his little apartment bedroom using $400 or $500 worth of machinery to stop a multi-billion-dollar tank column, this is asymmetric warfare that's been seen in the history of mankind. And so if we're making those kinds of impacts on the battlefield with this technology, imagine what it can do across everyday living for people that need to close food deserts, people that need medical care. And every single model, every single economic analysis I've seen across this entire thing has shown, on average, right between 20 and 25 times cheaper than traditional delivery, 100% green. I mean, there's really no downside other than the FAA has to take on a little bit more responsibility without additional funding.
Right. 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 You've hit the nail on the head. That is the challenge. And I think when you talk about other countries, they don't have that challenge, right? They just write a check, or their regulatory agencies have different mandates. Maybe it's, the FAA mandate has changed over the years. It used to be safety, and then it was safety and, business and innovation. And then some bad things happened. It went back just to safety. And so we're starting to see that change again. Be interesting to see what happens, over the next couple of years, hopefully, as we see a new administrator at some point, permanent. And I look back too, and you're talking about that transition from military to commercial and seeing the impacts in Ukraine. And it's funny how quickly we forget based on, we've already seen this happen once in the last 100 years, right? Just general commercial aviation, the impacts it had on the military and the war fighter. And then, immediately the economic impact it had within 10 years. I remember, reading recently about folks coming back from World War I and the initial introduction of aircraft, and these pilots came back and they had no jobs. Like, there was no, once you left the military, there was no, but within 10 years, they didn't have enough pilots, right? So it's just happened that fast, and it's going to be even more rapid, I think, in this industry. So yeah, really interesting to think about.
People would ask me all the time, like, what, we're going to have things flying over our head all of a sudden? I'm like, you have things flying over.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah. But they'll be a little bit more noticeable, and then they won't be, right? They don't just be ubiquitous, and you'll be used to it. And I do want to touch on a couple of things. We've talked about industry stuff, but we do have, quite a few founders and investors listen to this podcast. And I always like to ask questions about just generally being a startup founder, some of the challenges. First, I want to know, with the way the capital markets are now, what's it like raising money in this industry right now, in this environment? Anything you'd like to see change, or just kind of like to get some feedback on that?
It's weird and different how quickly it pivoted. For 15 years, we've been at grow at all costs. If you have $1 left in the bank over or under your budget, you've screwed up. That could be $1 for growth, right? And so you need to get penalized for what would be considered fiscal responsibility to most other business owners. But the VCs incentivize not doing that. And now, all of a sudden, we're seeing this rapid 180-degree pivot to where, growth isn't the main priority. It is fundamentals and cash
survival. Right. Yeah, right.
And so, it's almost crazy how much they completely did a 180, but kind of did so on a pedestal without eating any crow about it, which I find funny. And so we found that a lot of the to our conversation before we jumped on the recording, it's going to flush out on the VC side, just like the startup side, and the ones that, have made quality firms are going to excel well past this, and the ones that don't, right? Just like, and so, it's kind of that same thing. It's a flock to quality. It's really making sure you're not overlooking everything. You're buttoning everything up, being a hardware portion of our business, plus, we're in the Midwest, and we're on top of that, we're in a highly regulated industry. And so, it's not quite as easy as raising for a SaaS company, which sometimes, I kick myself.
Right.
But, it's more rewarding. And in my opinion, it's more of a hedge against the risk that VCs are looking for. If you look at even the Fortune 50, right, the FANG stocks, Apple is worth as much as the rest of them combined because they have hardware, they have assets to fall back on, and they're not doing the software spike. For whatever reason, that quick spike seems to be what the investors were after for many years. So I think it's just a lot of founders reframing their paradigms, a lot of investors reframing their paradigms, and going back to being agile and adaptable.
Yeah, that really strikes home. I watched a podcast yesterday. I won't name the founder, but very successful founder, and made the comment that he's always wanted to be a hardware founder, but he couldn't afford to be a hardware founder until he became a software founder and had enough money to then start a hardware company, because he says, that's when you talk about making impacts in the world, starting a hardware company. And if you can throw in some software on the side just to keep investors happy, which is what there's an obvious need for the software that you guys have developed, to tie your products together. Did you know how difficult of a challenge you were taking on when you said, I want to start a company in the Midwest and it's going to be a hardware company, and fill in the blanks? Did you know?
I equated to when I was 17 and walked into the recruitment.
Right.
Send me, right? And they're like, oh, what do you want to do? I want to blow things up. I want to jump out of helicopter. I want to be a ranger. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, right.
And then you get there and you realize that firefights in country on a daily basis is very different than the commercials, and that there's a lot of non-firefight times, and you're just out of your mind, right? And so it's very much the same thing where you kind of have this glamorized idea, and then you jump in and you realize there's almost no glamour to
it. right
Hex of accomplishments and accolades and a little bit of recognition here and there, but if you're in it for that, good luck. You're gonna be sad. And I mean, it's taken us 10 years to get here, and that's 10 years without a paycheck. That's 10 years of putting my money into the company. I mean, it's you got to be a special kind of masochist for
right. And I'm glad. I think that's being told. I've had conversations with folks, and that's something that I hear. And I think there's a lot of push, to create more entrepreneurs. And I think, and I think that's a good thing. But I also think the reality is, like, a true entrepreneur is a different kind of person, and you're willing to, it's like joining certain parts of certain services. Like, you kind of have to look forward to the suffering and the pain a little bit, right? And if you don't, then you're in the wrong line of business. So
having this conversation, right? If you're not sitting there at 2 a.m. saying, "Man, I wish I had to stay up later," you're probably not the right kind of person.
Right.
Maybe a lot of people can be business owners and entrepreneurs, and I almost equate it to software is like joining the military, hardware is like joining special operations.
Right. I like it. I like that. I'll use that again for sure, if it's okay. So last question before we wrap up here, and I try to ask everybody this, is you've been in this 10 years now. If there was one thing looking back that you could have done a little bit differently, is it what comes to the top of your mind as far as, maybe I wish I would have done this earlier, or done this quicker, or looked for maybe raised later, or raised sooner? Anything that kind of jumps out to you?
So many. They're easy to critique in hindsight, and I wish that maybe we were doing some of the inspection side of drones to make money, asked to sustain some of the R&D, not be so reliant on investor money in the beginning. Some of my personnel choices, no matter how much I thought I vetted these people, still it's bad hires. They hurt, and there's all kinds of things I shoulda, woulda, coulda, but it's almost like battle drill 6, you really can't afford to go in and start second guessing. Should I have gone left? Should I have gone right? You have to pick your move. You have to, you got to drive to it. And, there's a million things where, some of the biggest impacts have come from some of the smallest events, like truly butterfly effect, very unrelated cascades. And it's one of the most positive or negative things that ends up happening that month or year or whatever. And so it's very hard to go back and do that and do it in an accurate way where you're actually taking reality in, and not this kind of glorified, nostalgic, romanticized version of what you think your golden days, your glory days.
Right. So what I hear there is, like, there's no way you can predict. So just keep grinding, if you're going to do it, keep grinding. And like, you just don't know where the opportunities, and I've heard that a couple different times. It's like the real opportunities companies found came from like things they would have never expected. But if they wouldn't have agreed to do it, this thing, they would never had that opportunity. So it's
I equate it to, go have somebody hit you and just rock you as hard as they can in the face. What are you going to do? Right. Most
right.
people think they know what they're going to do, but they end up reacting very, very differently when knuckles hit your teeth. Right. It's people got to actually get into it before they start making those kind of calls about themselves.
Right. No, that's a good point. I think it's a perfect place to end too. Ryan, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. I know you got a lot going on, and excited to keep following your guys' journey. And one day you can look back and then take some time off and go like, what am I doing next? Right? We built a real company. We exited in a great way, or whatever, went public. Who knows? And now you're able to look back and go, man, that was a really good run. I remember all the painful things, but it was a good run. So look forward to that, to seeing you guys succeed. But yeah, thanks for taking some time.
Thank you so much for having me, and as always, appreciate the support and love talking to you.
If you'd like to be a part of the UAS Cluster Initiative community and get access to more of our content, check us out at www.uascluster.com.